Welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and I'm super excited today because this is a guest we've been wanting to have for the longest time, Simon Kemp, who's the founder of Kepios, who is the producer of the Global Digital Report. You have probably seen him, or at least you've seen his reports. You know exactly who he is. So thank you so much for being on the show, Simon. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So like I said, as I was mentioning earlier, I think you have created one of the best pieces of content marketing, if not the best in Asia, for many different reasons. I think it's so well respected. It's so used. Even in my previous agency days, we used it to validate, new pitch ideas we were using. And I know other organizations have used it as well, both tech companies, agencies, multinationals. So it's something that has kind of, expanded across multiple, spaces and regions and things like that. So I would love to really find out, how did you come with the idea of putting together such a report?
It didn't start with the intention of it being content marketing. We're totally upfront. It was an accidental success. So it was born out of when I launched We Are Social in Asia back in 2011. We would have these ongoing conversations with journalists, with potential clients, even with potential recruits as to whether or not digital, but especially social media, was really a thing. I would be sending 3 or 4 emails every day saying, yes, people in Vietnam are using Facebook. Here are some numbers that we've collected that show that people are doing this. And yes, mobile's a thing, and you should take a take a little bit more of a serious attitude towards it. And it just sort of got to the stage where I was sending so many of these emails that I thought, I'll stick all of that data into a couple of slides and I'll send that out. And then I was having a conversation with a journalist at Tech in Asia, and he said, why don't you just stick it up on the internet and then we can access it? And I was like, that's a really good idea, thank you. So we stuck a couple of them up in late 2011. I think the very first one I did was 16 slides. Just here's some headline data that you might need for the whole world about digital, and then it's just mushroomed. Every year it's grown. So this year we did 7,500 charts. So bit of a scope creep there. But yeah, I think it was that really drove it, is that every time we published something, everybody would say, oh, that's really helpful, but do you have any data on this? And I'd really like to know if you could break it down by this demographic or this country. So, when you've got questions coming in, it makes life an awful lot easier to know what people want.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good. Like you said, you got feedback from the community. Do you feel like there's always a pressure to level up? Like going from 16 to over 7,000, like it's a massive jump. I mean, it's in a decade, but like, how can you take it any higher, bigger than it already is? I mean, it's already massive in terms of its scope.
Yeah, we did a step change in the way that we produced the reports a couple of years ago. We sort of upgraded to a slightly more sophisticated production system, because before that, every one of those slides was created individually by hand, which was a shocker. Now, fortunately, with the magic that is the Adobe Creative Cloud suite, we've at least managed to produce some of the stuff automatically. Yeah, the temptation to just massively grow everything is always there. To be honest, the only thing that really limits it is the ability to find data that we trust, that we can get at a sufficient sort of representative scale for as many countries as we want to cover. But when we do find new stuff, then we include it. So the desire to level up is more driven by the desire to answer more questions, rather than, it's not like we must do more.
Yeah.
It's, oh my goodness, that's a really good question. I want to be able to answer it as well. So yeah, I think it's as much driven by the desire to support the people who support the report.
And how are you getting some of those data sources? You mentioned that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, so a lot of them are established. So we use the same sources as much as possible year in, year out. We've gone through a bit of a cleansing process over the last couple of years to take out a few of the sources we'd lost faith in. So we've narrowed down, for example, the number of places where we'll take our internet user data from. But yeah, so it's all across the internet, basically. So we've got our lovely data partners who are, we've got an established relationship with them. So organizations like Global Web Index and Statista, App Annie, all these great companies that provide data directly to us. So a lot of the time that's commercial data that they typically would sell, but we've got an agreement with them where there's certain data points that they want to raise publicity of, we feel are useful at a global level, especially to start conversations.
Yeah.
So work with them to sort of identify what the key data points that we want to be sharing are. But then the rest of the data comes from just a whole bunch of really generous organizations that make their data available on the internet. We have to go and collect it one by one. So for those people who are familiar with the reports, and if you're not, go and check them all, they're free. So there's no reason not to. But the social media data is probably one of the things that the reports are best known for. And an awful lot of that data is still collected digit by digit, copy paste. So how many 15-year-old women in Myanmar are using Facebook, copy paste? 16-year-olds. Yeah, it's laborious.
You mentioned you also are leveraging the Adobe Creative Cloud as well. How is that working out? Like you said, is it like a template, or you said it's doing some of this stuff automated? How's it work out?
Yeah, so they've got this really neat, if you're an old school kind of tech person like me, grew up in the digital days of the 90s, you may remember mail merge.
Yes.
Remember that? You feed in your fields and then print your letter out. It's very similar technology to that. So we have this enormous Excel spreadsheet with all of the numbers, all the calculations, and then we create these relatively sort of rudimentary connections to InDesign, where the data direct out of Excel just feeds straight into various fields, and it just populates it. And it still requires quite a lot of doing stuff. It's not like you just create a spreadsheet and press go. You've still got to create the reports manually and then edit things out once you produce them. But it just saves an awful lot of grief. I still remember 2017 report, and we were doing 18, 19 hours a day of copy, paste, every single one of those charts for every country. That's risky as well as being scary. So we had to sort of progress beyond that. And it turns out that InDesign was the magic behind it. It also means that we can create much more. I'm a massive obsessive compulsive when it comes to my graphics. I want all of the bars to be the same width. And for some bizarre reason, Excel's charts are not the same width on every bar. It just drives me insane. So yeah, I can now create things in another part of the creative suite and then feed them all in. And you'll have to stop me because I get very excited when I talk.
Yeah, no, like I said, it's something you're very passionate about. I think you have to be passionate, like I said, to spend so much time in the creation of it. Not only the creation, but also I think the distribution of it, because I think that's something you're also very good at, is distributing it. So I obviously follow you on LinkedIn. I know you're active, obviously, on social media platforms. And one thing I'll share my observation, I'd love to find out what else you do, is you not only provide the stats, because I think a lot of people just provide like the stats. And this is something I've been working with research agencies to kind of move away from, is, you know, not just the numbers, but what is the story? What is the actual insights and key takeaways that people can use? And I love that that's you drill down. And so it's not just, here's a stat about, you know, social media usage in Cambodia, for example. It is, you know, here's some of the key takeaways, or here's how to leverage it within your organization, or at least some ideas. So it's going one layer deeper, which obviously takes even more time. I understand as a content creator myself. So yeah, how else are you distributing? I know you work with partners as well. So you worked with Hootsuite in the past. It's kind of so I would love to find out, how else are you distributing this massive piece of content?
So it sort of started from the stories that we wanted to tell, rather than having a clever content marketing strategy, I suppose. I think what's really important is that you find your niche, you find a little bit of differentiated value you can contribute that other people want, that nobody else is necessarily doing. And I think, you know, you were just mentioning in the question there that you talk to a lot of research agencies. I think what's really important to establish here is that we're not really a research company. We don't conduct our own surveys. We don't really go out and do face-to-face interviews and all that kind of stuff. We rely on people with really strong skills in the research space to feed the data that we believe is valuable. We'll collaborate with them a lot of the time. But, you know, so my background was in strategy. I was doing management consulting and then strategy for advertising agencies. And those conversations that I would be having with my clients are what really informed what goes into the report, but then also what we do with it at a content marketing sort of level. So the stuff that goes into the report is just the start point. I mean, we give that stuff away for free because people need this data to be able to make better informed decisions. But it's the analysis that goes on top of that that allows us to generate revenue as a business. You know, we drip feed some of the provocations from those analyses into the social media content that we put out there. You can't really, it's a bit like if you go into an ice cream store and you've got all these flavors in front of you, you're going to want to taste them before you buy a whole cone. And that's exactly what we're doing, is we're giving you those little scoops of taster content. I mean, it's how content marketing works, right? You give people a teaser and then they want more. And I think, the stories that we decide to tell do depend a little bit on what's coming out in the data, but also what the conversations that our audiences are going to have on different channels. So LinkedIn, when we produce content for LinkedIn, I'll do a little bit more of I'll usually max out my 1,300 characters every time. I'm deleting paragraphs and sentences to get it exactly to 1,300 characters. Otherwise I just write forever. We've got the blog posts that we write, and this quarter we were fairly modest and only did 3,500 words. But last quarter, when it was the full-on COVID nonsense, it was over 7,000 words in a blog post, which was a full-on dissertation. Yeah. It's just that trying to get me to stop talking and get me to stop writing is close to impossible. The social content in LinkedIn will be looking for those great conversations that we can have with whoever. So whether it's marketers, journalists, whoever. Twitter's quite different. You're looking for something that is going to draw people into the richer content. So you were almost starting from a very small base, but you want them to go to a very rich base. Whereas LinkedIn, a lot of the time, it's not quite self-contained, but that a lot, you know this yourselves, all of you watching and listening along, when you post something on LinkedIn with a link, it's probably a handful of people that will click on the link and everybody else will comment without reading it. And it's like, oh my goodness, how can I condense this story down such that the conversation has value without somebody going on and reading the full thing? So yeah, it's difficult. I think one of the bits, having run social media agencies, done stuff for clients before, everybody assumes that we're everywhere on all these social platforms. And I think one of the really strong points that I would make to anybody that's listening, watching today, we only do 1.5 platforms. So we do LinkedIn as our primary, and we do it, with a real investment of time and effort. Twitter, to be honest, a lot of that is just headline from the report, put it out with a comment and link to it. So, we do spend time doing Twitter, but I don't feel that we necessarily invest as much time as we could do in making Twitter as successful as it could be. But you've got, time and resources. Do I want to promote something I've already got, or do I want to move on to the next report? It's always that one. So we're really lucky in that because the report content itself has value, the real social media success is other people taking that content and telling their story with the data. So I think that's the magic there. I'm going to pause and let you ask your next question. Otherwise I'll talk all day, but there is an extra bit to this that I want to come back to.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to recap one of the things. So 2 things which you mentioned I really liked, one of which is the 1.5 approach. Because I think this is a challenge I always get with friends as well. There's like, I should be on every single channel. I'm like, why? If you can do 1 or 2 channels really well, why would you do 5 channels really crappy and just try to be everywhere? So I love that you guys are kind of structured and you're kind of disciplined in that 1.5 approach.
I love the way you say disciplined as though it was a choice. It's a necessity rather than a strategy. But okay, thank you. I'll take it.
I think it works absolutely. And another thing, which I was very excited when you're talking about LinkedIn, because we're actually working on a course. It's called LinkedIn Posts or the New Blogs. So going back to exactly what you're talking about, like moving away from, having a link, but including all the key insights that you wouldn't say a 7,000 word blog, trying to compile that into 1,300 words, because that's what people are consuming. They're not really jumping on the platform. And if they are, like you said, it's not penalized, but you definitely see lesser reach in terms of the algorithm. So super practical takeaways, I think, for anyone promoting on either of those channels.
Yeah, and I think especially for those people that are looking at LinkedIn, you've got social media on board broadly, but let's take LinkedIn, seeing as it is such a powerful platform for especially business-to-business marketers. I think you recognize that your network is the value there. And a lot of the time, what you're not looking to do is do a whole series of one-off conversions, because that is really hard work. If every single post you're expecting X return, and it needs to be a sort of self-sustained, entirely justified model, you end up making a lot of poor decisions based on what's going to give you the greatest immediate outcome. And totally inappropriate analogy here is you're almost looking at a teenage boy's approach to dating. In the back of his mind is a short-term outcome that he wants to get, but in reality that's probably going to be poor choices in the long term if he wants that relationship to last. And I think the danger is an awful lot of marketing relies on that one night stand marketing. And it's, it feels maybe quite exciting for the short term, but over the longer term, it really isn't what delivers happiness. And I think, you know, the outcome that marketers are looking for is that longer term success and happiness. So a lot of the time, the stuff that we'll publish is not necessarily the one that's going to deliver the greatest business outcome. It's the one that builds the relationships that allow us to get into those better results longer term. And listening to a lot of the questions that we get from marketers, and I'm sure you're exactly the same in your business, is it's that they've got so much pressure from so many different angles to deliver magic.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not how social interaction works in the real world. You wouldn't expect to go out on one single sales meeting with a prospective client and come home with $1 million contract unless you are super lucky, and you certainly can't deliver that every single day. So you've got to take, you know, social media has the word social in it for a reason. It's about those relationships and the prospects that they build. And I think if you're looking at LinkedIn as a revenue driver directly, you're probably missing the point that revenue is a consequence of the other things that you do.
Absolutely. I tend to use that one night stand analogy quite a lot as well, because you see a lot of marketers doing that. They only look for the short-term stuff, and then they get very frustrated when they don't get like very immediate results. Going back to what your point, thinking about it from a long-term committed perspective, that's when you actually see the most, you know, ROI, the most impact on your business. And so, you know, another good point that you really brought up was thinking about the social element of it. So I think a lot of people forget, even though, you know, we're communicating, you know, screen to screen, that there is another person on their side. So you see a lot of, you know, messaging that's very like, you know, hard selling, that just completely disregards the social element. So one analogy that I always try to use is like, you go to a networking event and why are you, you know, communicating so different than you would on a social media? It's the same kind of format. It's, you know, it's an open forum. You're meeting different people. You're exchanging ideas. Why wouldn't you take the same approach? Going back to your point, you're not going to, every person you talk to and grab their card at a networking event or like any kind of event, you're not going to expect, you know, $100,000 deal off the back of it. Like that. It just doesn't happen. So why would you expect that from social media? I think that's a really good point that a lot of marketers need to hear, particularly the leadership. I think the leadership puts a lot of pressure on the managerial level staff to say, especially now, like, what's the ROI of this? And it's like, it's a long-term thing. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think the ROI one fascinates me because there's two sides to it. There's this push for greater accountability within the content marketing, the social media activities that we do. And then there's this expectation that every single post will deliver magic. And I think you very clearly, as a practitioner in this field, you've got to separate those two things out. Absolutely push for accountability. And the key thing there is that we've got to get much, much more realistic about what we're measuring. Far too many of the metrics that the industry is focused on quantify performance, but I'm not convinced that those metrics are necessarily meaningful. It's very easy to game a lot of those metrics. If I want hundreds of comments and likes on my post, I know how to do that, but you end up annoying people.
Yeah.
I have these pet hates, and apologies if this is something that you do, but I'm gonna bring it up anyway. Anybody that says, we've got a new report out, leave a comment below if you'd like me to send it to you. My immediate reaction is I'm going to give you the middle finger, because it's just like, stop being a dick. If you're going to give it away, right? Find different ways to boost that. Ask other people to share it if they find it valuable. Do it on their terms. But you know, you've got all of these nonsense things on LinkedIn at the moment where these guys are like, are you intending to work from home more often? A like is this, an applause is that, and a think, and I just, it drives me fucking insane. You can totally game that. And, you know, you can go back at the end of it and say to your boss, look at all this amazing engagement. Whereas in reality, people are just like, I just wanted the report. I don't care about you. I don't care about your business. I just want the numbers. As far as I'm concerned, make it as easy as possible for everybody in the world to get your content. But within that content, make it as easy as possible for people to find you when they've got another question. So, you know, we went through this question as to whether or not we should gate content. And in reality, it was counterproductive, because so the analogy here is fruit. You want as many animals as possible to come and take the fruit from your tree, to consume those seeds and to fly far and wide and to disperse the seeds and the opportunity. Sure enough, some of those seeds are going to fall on stony ground. It's going to be a waste of effort, but that's the gamble that you take. Sure, everybody that reads the report is not going to turn into a customer, let alone $1 million customer. But if you're getting 10 million people reading your reports every year, 10 million views, which is what the report generates, how many of those need to translate into value for that to be, you know, when you've got 10 million as a base, very tiny percentage of that is all that needs to convert for it to work. So yeah, I think a lot of people put too much pressure on their metrics and expect magic from them. But if you know what your metric of value is, focus on that as your key measure. Sure, look at other stuff. If you think about the high jump at the Olympics, what's the key metric in the high jump? It's dead straightforward. How high did he jump? How high did she jump? But to be able to understand whether you're what's contributing to your success, you may need to measure things like the speed. You may need to measure all sorts of other variables within that as well. The variables are the bits, unfortunately, that way too much of the time we're looking at. Reach is just a variable. It's not an outcome. Unless you are an advertising supported business where every eyeball has a tangible value, reach is just one of those speed variables in a high jump. It's not telling you how high you jumped. I think it's that bit. If your business is about leads, you've got to be measuring it on leads. And then you get into, is it a qualified lead? What kind of lead is it? Be ruthless with yourself, because otherwise you're wasting your time, you're wasting your effort. You're definitely not setting yourself up to succeed as an individual or as a business. And sure, there's easier ways of doing it, but easy isn't why we get out of bed in the morning. If you just wanted an easy life, stay in bed, eat diluted food. What's the point? Sorry, high horse, I'll get off.
No, absolutely. Once again, I think that's why it's the greatest piece of content, because you spend so much time and effort into it that it's very difficult for people to duplicate it. And I think nowadays, most content is like very, very easy to duplicate. Like it's kind of like carbon copy. But I think yours, because you've put in so much effort and so much time in thinking through it, it's almost impossible to replicate what you're doing without doing the same.
I think a big part of that just comes from consistency. So this is one of the magic secret ingredients for any kind of content marketing is you may be lucky. You may write that amazing American novel first time. But consistency is what drives it. And if you look at something like Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, there were sequels to this thing. It's not the one thing that made it magic. It's all the stuff that went around it as well, right? So consistency over time. It took us a decade to get here. And, the number of times you hear about startups that took 10 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing. You've got to really invest in keeping it going. And, I think set your expectations low. But I was really lucky in that we started that report without it intended to be a piece of content marketing. So when we had 500 views on the first report, it's like, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's me. I no longer need to write those 500 emails. That was my benchmark of success, not looking at somebody on the internet and thinking, oh my God, they get tens of millions of views on their YouTube channel. Oh, I'm so inferior. It's like completely reframe. What is it that you're trying to change about your business? Not, do you want to become the next internet sensation superstar? If that's what your intention is, you're going to have to compete with Kardashian, not with your internet marketing kind of peers. So yeah, I think, set yourself up for reality rather than amazing. There's always, I've still got the guys in the back of my mind that one day I will become Seth Godin. And it's like, I'm never going to become Seth Godin, because what he does is just on such a different level. But at the same time, hopefully, when somebody around the world thinks, I wonder how many people are using Telegram in Somalia, that report might have the answer and they turn to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, I think another point that I really like that you pulled out is, someone, you get 500 views, that's 500 emails that you don't have to send, which I think is a beautiful way of putting it. And I think for anyone that's kind of listening, like, that is the power of social, is you get to reach so many people. And like you said, you do it on a consistent basis. And I think that's been another part of your key to your success, is people look forward to it every year or every quarter whenever you guys put it out. They're like, when's the next one coming out? So I think that anticipation that you built is extremely powerful. And the only reason they look forward to it is because you've been doing it for so long and, on such a consistent basis. So
you set the expectation, which is the important thing. That's what content marketing is for. It sets expectations, whether it is for the content itself or for the subsequent conversation. So always have that subsequent conversation in mind when you're producing the content. The content shouldn't be the answer. It should almost be the question that then leads to the conversation that has value.
Absolutely. And another thing I want to get your thoughts on is, I know that content marketing, the goal is not really to drive immediate business, but I would love to find out, you've been doing it for 10 years. How has this really impacted the business, the actual business that you're running? Because you're not in the business of putting into the reports. Like that's something you do.
Yeah, to be fair, the reports do generate us revenue. So you'll see that we have the sponsors of the report. So We Are Social and Hootsuite are the very kind people that make it possible for me to invest my time in producing those reports, and the rest of the team as well. So we do get revenue from those, but the rest of the revenue, Kepios, which is the business that produces the report, started out as it was supposed to be a strategy consultancy. You know, we expected to run these big annual planning workshops and all these amazing things that consultancies like McKinsey would do. You know, that was my benchmark, going to be the next McKinsey.
Yes.
And then I quickly realized that everybody's like, so you do those reports, don't you? Could I ask you a question about, and I was like, I really enjoy this. As you've seen today, I massively enjoy nerding out talking about them. Why don't we turn the business into that? The business follows the business follows the questions that we get. And you know, we're lucky, we're quite a small business, so we can adapt quite quickly to the opportunities that we see. And we've not got a lot of infrastructure costs that force us going down, oh my God, we have to produce these widgets. So the business follows the opportunity. I know that sounds a little bit obvious, but if we suddenly get a whole series of questions next quarter around one particular slide that's in the report that's different, and we think, oh, that's actually a really interesting business opportunity, then we'll just follow it, because that's the way that a services organization can work. You follow where the opportunity is. And if you've already got the inbound inquiry, why fight it? If you enjoy doing it and you can make money. So one of the really interesting things you were mentioning earlier about, should we be on this platform or that platform? We just introduced a new chart 2 reports ago. So we just produced the second version of it, which compares audiences of all the different social channels against the audiences of the other. So how much overlap is there in Facebook's audience compared to TikTok or whatever else? And the startling finding of that is that the vast majority, more than 90% of every single platform uses at least one other platform. Who knew? It's almost a shock, isn't it, right? Just having data on that and putting that out has opened up so many new conversations. That single chart suddenly meant marketers can now turn around to their bosses and say, sure, TikTok is fascinating as an opportunity from a content perspective, but 99% of the audience is available on other channels. So sure enough, huge growth, really exciting, but all of those users are available elsewhere. So does TikTok offer me a better creative opportunity versus any other platform? That's a much more important question than all the kids have jumped onto TikTok, they need to be there. And in reality, it's like all the kids have jumped on every platform. So you need to be everywhere if that's your mentality, and you can't do that. Resource-wise, that's a disaster. So, you know, take a step back, think critically about, once again, what's the opportunity that we're trying to approach as a business. But so that was a bit of a long-winded way to say that single slide has opened up a whole series of different business opportunities, because it's a question that people need an answer to. As soon as you've got that data, you then move to higher value questions.
No, I'm thinking through it as well as an entrepreneur myself. Like I said, I love that you have pivoted. I think that's something that I've been forced to do as well. I think, but you talked about, you know, you wanted to do strategy sessions, so that big strategy sessions, and now you kind of pivoted based on demand from what specific topic. And a lot of that has come through, I guess, inbound people messaging you around questions and things like that. And then that has turned into, I like your website. I love the way you structure it, by the way. I think it's very, very brilliant, very much you. But to better understand, is it consulting? Is that like the more bite-sized consulting? Is that what, because, you know, what one question could be like, you know, hour, it could be like a half-day workshop. I know you run workshops as well. You do speaking, like, what is the main driver, I think, to, you know, the flow?
The website is a complete disgrace because it does not reflect in any way what we do as a business. It's like the doctors that don't exercise and don't drink in moderation. We are guilty of exactly these things as well. We have a 3/4 finished website ready to produce. We just have not got around to produce it because it's so much better value for me to invest my time in producing a new report, get the inbound inquiries. So the actual website doesn't tell you really what we do at all. Rather than, I think, just go back to your point about pivoting. I think it's really interesting that the industry has adopted that term. Because if you think about pivoting, right, if you think about a basketball player that pivots, they've got one foot planted on the ground and they pivot around it, but they're not moving. And I think what's really odd about pivot is that it doesn't take into account our bit of the industry. I think it's great for manufacturing and all that kind of stuff. You pivot. But for a services business especially, it's much, much more sensible to think about a journey where you're always moving. And I think if you think about the way that the best journeys work, you know that thing when you're on holiday, you've gone to a destination you're not familiar with, and you set out with an intention to go somewhere and you get lost. And suddenly you've got this amazing view, or you find, this is my holidays with my wife, it's like you find this new distillery and you're like, let's go and check this distillery out and see what whiskey's there. And all of a sudden, by accident, you find what you were actually looking for. You just didn't know it. I think far too many people try and put themselves in a bucket of this is what we do.
Yeah.
And it makes your life more difficult. It makes your client's life more difficult. And you're restricting yourself for no real reason. I mean, our website was always deliberately a bit wishy-washy because we didn't really want to say, we make these widgets. We just kind of wanted to say, we help you understand what people do on the internet. That's all we really do as a business. But you can make that a workshop, you can make it a briefing, you can make it a report. I think for those people, especially those that are in small businesses or they're starting their own entrepreneur journey, knowing what you enjoy doing, knowing what you're good at that other people appreciate is the only really important stuff. Sure, build a brand and all that stuff around it, but focusing too much is you spend all this time building these beautiful websites before you launch the business. So totally guilty of exactly the same thing. And then the instant you launch it, you realize that people want more of this and less of that. You're like, oh, okay. Do we stick to what we wrote or do we do what brings in the money? The answer is always what brings in the money, right?
Yeah.
So pivoting, if you're in a services business, try and get yourself away from pivoting and think much more about a journey where if you get to a crossroads, it's totally up to you to decide which way you go.
No, once again, really, really good advice, I think, for anyone starting a business, especially a service-based business. And this is something I wish I would have learned. Because I think I was very stuck in my ways. When I started the business, I was like, we're going to build this, I'm going to sell it like this. And same thing, it did not work out like that at all. It's been a completely kind of different switch. But it's been an interesting one that has, opened up a lot of new opportunities that we had never thought of. And going back to your point, it's going back to those conversations and seeing what are the questions people are really having? What are the challenges they're really having? Because the challenges you have in your mind could be very, very different. So I think by having that kind of open-minded and being able to move and go in different directions, like the journey you mentioned, I think it opens up so many opportunities from a business point of view. And another good point, which you mentioned, is I think too many people focus on the website. Like even for us, we didn't have the website for like the first year or two. We had a business that was doing quite well, but it looked like it was like from the 1980s, like or early 1990s. Like it was terrible. And even now it's not great, but to your point, I think you find so much more value in having the conversations and putting out the content to see what actually works and what resonates with people, and then try to, move in the direction that they find most valuable. So really, really good advice to anyone in service-based entrepreneur.
For the website one, the website is like the logo. We as business owners especially place way more emphasis on the importance of those things compared to anybody else. What fascinates me is that I find it incredibly easy to produce a huge long blog post with vast amounts of information. But if you ask me to write a single paragraph on my website, goodness no, that's going to take me 3 weeks to sit down and nuance every single letter, let alone every single word. It's just ridiculous, the amount of pressure we put on ourselves. It's just a piece of content marketing. It's just there to serve a purpose. And we fall in love with things that really are not the answer to our problems. So whether it's a logo or whether it's the website, get it out, see what people ask about, and then keep fixing it. Giving advice that I'm not even following here. But yeah, I mean, I've discovered that in all honesty, the number of people that go to our website versus the number of people that read the reports, the disparity between those things is so great that it's just like the website's there for people that need it to realize that we're a legitimate business. But beyond that, people know what we do because of the reports anyway. So that's what they ask about. Nobody ever asks for the things that are on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you get a lot of the inbound through your own personal kind of profiles as well, like on LinkedIn, because like you said, it is a people-based platform, and people want to find out more about you and what you do. So I think beautiful way. Simon, this has been amazing. I could talk to you all day. I'm having so much fun. I know we have a couple other things lined up on the day, but thank you so much. How can people get in touch with you to find out more about what you do?
LinkedIn would be the best place. I haven't had that conversation throughout our chat today. So you'll find me as Simon Kemp, obviously, black and white photo if you're struggling to identify which one's me. If you are also on Twitter, then give me a shout. You'll find me as Eskimond, but yeah, don't go to the website. Come to social media.
It's the website. Follow my link. Yeah, follow my LinkedIn.
Totally.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simon. Like I said, if you watch this, I know you found it helpful because I found it super helpful. So feel free to share it with anyone who's, in a situation where they find value in these insights. So thank you so much, Simon. Really, really appreciate your time and being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
All right. Take care, everyone.